Let's talk about Nigeria's Eurobond, which declined today on the global markets as local bonds trading surged, as well as equities and over-the-counter market securities, all in response to Friday's sovereign downgrade of Nigeria's credit rating by Moody's Investor Services. In the meantime, the central bank has extended until February the 10th the deadline for the changeover of new Naira notes for older notes of 200, 500, and 1,000. Now, let's squeeze all of this together with Chukwu, who is a licensed dealer and CEO at Carry Asset Management. Good evening to you, sir. Thanks for coming through on the show tonight. I'm sure we've got a whole lot to talk about. But let's start with the Moody's latest report. What's your reading of this downgrade of Nigeria's credit rating from B3 to CAA1?
Well, let me start by thanking you, Bosin, for having me. It was most expected. Of course, if you look at the underlying assumptions that underpin that downgrade, you will clearly have to accept that our credit rating is gradually turning to junk. We've moved from B to CAA1, which means we are now our credits are now of very high risk. Of course, the next point we'll get to will become a junk and will become untouchable. And like you actually also pointed out, we have seen, of course, that meant that people are going to dump our Eurobond instruments and foreign currency debt instruments because Nigeria is teetering on the edge of becoming a junk bond. The reality is that we know that the government revenue is highly constrained, and which is the basic thing that they talked about. If you look at the first 11 months of last year, from the Ministry of Finance, they said total federal government revenue was only 6.5 trillion naira, at which period the government spent 12.8 trillion naira. Of course, of the 6.5 trillion naira the government earned, 5.24 trillion naira was spent to service debt, which means 80% of federal government revenue for the first 11 months of last year was spent on servicing debt. And we are still accumulating additional debt today, which means we are going to get to the point where debt service in reality will become more than 100% of our government revenue. And that will clearly mean that government will struggle to meet our debt obligations.
But despite as I put it, the assumptions and the underlying factors, the agency, Moody, says Nigeria's outlook is still stable in terms of the economy. Do you agree?
Well, I have my doubt about saying that the outlook is stable. Of course, they could say the outlook is stable in the short term, as they also highlighted very strongly that the economic policies could change come February 25th after the election, that the next government is likely going to try to consolidate government expenditure and reduce the leakages we currently have, and therefore, and also deal with some of those major challenges we have, including the issue of subsidy on petroleum products, subsidy on electricity, and all those things. So maybe in the short term, they could say the outlook is stable. But I think Nigeria's outlook is not so stable if nothing is done. If we continue the current trajectory, and then accumulate debt without growing the revenue, certainly one could say that outlook will become very unstable or weak.
Is it comforting to you that the Moody says the immediate debt default risk for Nigeria is low? Should we go more borrowing, comforted that the risk of default right now is low?
You know, Bosin, when the figures Moody used to make that assumption or to make that conclusion were based on budgeted figures. I have mentioned here the actual figure for last year, and the actual figure for this year, unless something changes, may not be materially different from the actual figures of last year, because that of 2021 was also in the same region. So, in as much as you could say that default, it does not look threatening, does not look very likely. But if we continue in this way, in the next 2-3 years, we might find ourselves in the same situation as Ghana. I pray that we don't continue in that trajectory. But in terms of local currency default, I think that possibility is very remote. But foreign currency default is quite strong, because if you consider the fact that Nigeria today is struggling to have enough foreign exchange to import refined petroleum products, for the first time in a long period, we had many months of negative balance of trade, where our foreign total export was less than our total imports. And these are indicators that you are going into balance of payment difficulties. Once you enter the balance of payment difficulties, default on your loans becomes imminent.
So what happens, therefore, with this rating report on the eve of our elections? What does it mean for the country? What does it mean for the markets in general?
I think it's a negative report card for the government. For the market, you've seen how foreign investors are voting with their feet. I don't think we're going to see any major inflow of foreign capital into the economy until after the election. And it depends on the outcome of the election. Whoever wins the election will determine whether investors, local and foreign, will have confidence that there's going to be a turnaround. We're going to pivot away from current trajectory into a more prudent economic management period. Otherwise, this report that we're looking at is actually a very negative report on the economy. It scares away investors because, like I said, if you look at the categorization of Moody's rating, a CAA1 and CAA2 are all towards junk. They are non-investment grade rating, which means you don't qualify as an investment instrument for those discerning investors who use Moody's as one of the bases to assess their investment portfolio.
Okay, so what are you hearing today on the market as far as the Moody's report is concerned and the extension for 10 days for the Naira swaps market impact piece of news? I'm sure you spend the weekend combing the house to be sure you have no news notes left. And again, on Sunday, the central bank says we've got the president's approval to extend it by 10 days. Is this a market moving piece of news?
Well, it's not a market moving piece of news. It relieved a lot of families. And people are still struggling to get access to those new currencies. Today, I asked myself to go and withdraw 100,000 for me from the bank, and they told me that there's no bank that is permitted to pay cash across the counter, which for me is creates unnecessary tension, creates a lot of difficulties. And they had to go and queue. About 3 of my staff had to go and queue to be able to withdraw 50,000 from me from their own ATM cards. And I asked, do you expect me to go and stay on the queue and be shoved around by young people and possibly be pushed and break my bone? So the reality is that the central bank is not managing this well, and that's unfortunate. Because why would you limit cash payment across the counter and ask everybody to go to an ATM machine? So the fact that you have extended this, if you do not smooth the process of cash withdrawal and cash deposit, you are going to end up even after the station with the same problems. I think central bank needs to smoothen this process. The idea of shutting down major outlets for cash withdrawals, particularly if their withdrawals are within the limits, should not be the case.
So what's your outlook on the current market week as we speak right now? The month of January is ending tomorrow. Do you think we've had a fairly positive first month of the new year? What's your outlook as we step into February in the next 48?
You know, Boston, as at the close of business today, the NGS had actually gained about 3.72%, which for me is not a bad one for a period that is pre-election month. For a period of this level of uncertainty, and at a point when inflation rate is in the region of 21.34%, where the central bank has increased the cash, the MPR, monetary policy rate, to 17.5%. So for you to still see a consistent gain like we saw today, about 90 basis point gain in NGX, is for me a lot of confidence from Nigerians that the equity instruments or the underlying assets have strong fundamentals. And of course, by the time we move to next month, people begin to take positions for benefit seasons. But most importantly, the outcome of the February 25th election will determine a lot of what will happen in the market. And I think if we get it right with that election, we're going to see a scramble for Nigeria's equity instruments and including other instruments.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for kicking off the new market week for us here on Broad Street. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Johnson Chukwu, licensed dealer and CEO at Carry Asset Management. We appreciate that.